earth spirits with people and their healing in a very, well, obviously intuitive, but in an unscripted way.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tracy, obviously you studied your science.
I did.
And you learned from experts,
Mm-hmm.
and you took tests, and you passed things, and you did research projects, and all of that, and clearly. And what happened with intuition? How did you feel that you wanted to grow into that area, and what did you do about it?
I always had this sense of when things were right for me.
Okay.
Kind of an example was when I had just finished college, I got a job offer in New Zealand, and it was an immediate, like, yes, I don't know anything about New Zealand, I don't know anything about the job, I don't know anything about anything, but yes.
Okay.
And I tended to kind of follow that inner knowing. I didn't call it intuition, but it was something that I felt.
And you do recognize it now as intuition, though.
Yes.
Even though it's
Yes.
not angels coming down with a little chalice and saying,
Yes.
you must go to New Zealand. Okay, that's right.
But that was sort of how I
Mhm.
continued through with the geology. And, when I got offered the PhD, that was, I tried a whole bunch of different stuff and all the doors closed, and then I found one and it was immediately a yes. And so I was sort of using intuition throughout my kind of professional
Mhm.
scientific career. But it was only when I was in the middle of my PhD that it became very clear to me that, as much as I loved the science, it wasn't fulfilling kind of all of who I was.
Cool.
And so I started doing a lot of reading into other things like energy and this, that, and the other, and I started seeing a healer. And
Also by intuition, or would you say, or
yeah,
how did it go?
Well, the first instance actually was that I was at a conference in Melbourne, and I was walking past this bookstore, and in the it had like a glass case,
Mhm.
and in the front of the glass case was this book, basically, that said, "Your body as energy,"
Mhm.
and I was like, "Oh, that looks sort of interesting. I've never considered this. Like, let's go and pick up the book." And I got kind of an electric zap when I touched it, and I was like, "Ooh, that's bizarre." So I bought that book. It was like $5 or something, and loved it. Totally loved it. And so I basically read everything by that author, and then she had some recommended book lists in the back of her books, and started reading those guys.
Mhm.
And after, I would say, probably a year, I kind of got to the point where I was like, oh, I'd like to actually see some of this, or like, I'd like to meet someone who does this,
Mhm.
or I got a little bit more curious about it. And so then a friend of mine was seeing a Barbara Brennan healer, and I went to see her, and I had my first sort of like, oh, energy. Like, whoa. And that was awesome. And I saw that lady for quite a while, and then she turned out to be running a course on intuitive development and traditional counseling.
Mhm.
So I decided to do that. And and then just sort of...
And how long was that course?
It was 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was a parallel.
I was doing that while I was finishing my PhD,
Okay.
so it's kind of a busy
Perfect.
time of my life.
Well, you told me a funny story once about your first assignment in that class. That would you mind repeating it? Because I think it's quite amusing for now an established intuitive to recall that that encounter with the intuitive teaching.
So, I started that course about 4 years ago. Was when it began, and basically we came into the first class. She says, "Oh, we're gonna do like an experiment on, what level your intuition is at." And she came and she had these blank envelopes, and she said, in each of these envelopes, and there's about 20, is an animal, and you have to guess what the animal is. And here's a piece of paper with a 1 through 20, and each envelope had a number, we had 30 seconds with each envelope, and we all did it, and I got 0 out of 0. And I was totally like, I'm gonna fail the course.
That's right. I have no intuition at all.
It was so bad. And luckily, everybody in the course basically had the same. There was a few people who got, like 4. But we all basically got none. And the teacher was pretty interesting about it, because she said the truth is there's almost nobody on the planet who could do this, because this is not how intuition works for most people. This is not what we do. And it was a really insightful way of showing, kind of like knocking our expectations away, because one of the things that, was kind of reiterated throughout the course is that intuition is different for everybody.
Yeah.
And in an intuition course, it's often difficult for the teacher to kind of, how do I get people to connect with their own intuition without then stifling that development by, certain exercises that lead to certain kinds of intuition only. And, for me, my intuitive style is mostly as an empath. I feel things. I basically feel all of the energy. And in the beginning, when I was really opening up to that, and I couldn't differentiate between what was me and what was something else.
Naturally.
And it took a long time, I'd say at least a year, to develop a solid sense of a baseline. Like, this is what my body feels like. This is what my emotional life feels like. This is what my thoughts kind of feel like. And it seems strange to say that, thoughts and emotions have a tangible feeling.
They do.
But as an empath, they definitely do.
Mm-hmm.
And once I kind of started to get that sense of what my thoughts felt like, then I could not hear, but I get a sense of what a guide's thoughts felt like, or what someone else's energy felt like. And when someone else's energy was moving through me, I could very clearly begin to be like, okay, this is not mine. Somebody else's stuff is moving through me, and then I could decide, what to do with it, basically. But I would say that in the beginning, it's very confusing. And you kind of just have to play around and be willing to experiment and be very gentle with yourself, because if you beat yourself up for, getting the answer wrong or not knowing the answer, you're not going to get anywhere, because there isn't really an answer. There's just this huge amount of information that is suddenly available.
Well, that's a beautiful way of putting it. Yes, I'm sure I would flunk the animal thing too, but it wouldn't bother me at this stage. I would laugh. I would just know that that's not one of the ways I typically receive things. But I also liked, if you don't mind my saying, you're bringing up the point that it's almost like we have our own compasses. We have our own sense of testing and validity, and it takes a while sometimes to gain your confidence in that.
Yeah.
And to see, oh, this is how I operate. I throw some things out, I take some things on.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when people try to say, oh, I need to develop in this way, or I need to hear things, or I need to see things, or my intuition is really closed and I need to do this, it's almost like, no, you work with what you've been getting, for this time, because it's reliable. And it's been working with you already for a long time. You just have to see for it. And then as you venture out into, another arena, doing a little reading for someone or just playing around, and then you have to wait for that compass to go with you, so you'll kind of have your own gauge.
Yeah, and my sense is that, everybody has, of the different kinds of intuition. For example, empath feeling is one, and, hearing is one, and seeing is one, and for those, and direct knowing is another. Everybody has all those facilities, but one of them is going to be your strength. And it's like, if in the beginning you can kind of feel into which of those is your strength, and you kind of work with that, which, like you said, is you'll know it. You've been using it throughout your life.
You have, actually.
You just haven't recognized it. And then if you can work with that one and build that one, then it becomes much easier to expand into the other ones. And to be honest, some people will never expand into the other ones because it's not useful, really.
No, as a matter of fact, you're getting information, and that's the point.
Yeah.
You ask yourself, what's the point of my having this intuition? To get information, to help myself and help others. Well, if you're helping yourself and helping others. But it's also interesting to me, you may have experienced this sometimes too, I'm not sure, is that people will say, oh, I never hear anything. Never hear anything. And then sometimes they'll recount an instance in which, well, I just felt like all of a sudden it was like, stop, don't do that. And I'm going, well, you may not have heard, a little elf come down and say stuff, but sort of the words were there, more, not just the direct knowing, but it sort of took a thing. Or sometimes, people will say, yeah, I saw this, well, really briefly, I saw this flower and it reminded me of my grandmother, and it's sort of like, but you say you never seen. Oh, that isn't seeing anything. I'm talking about seeing, giant angels or something. So there is a little more mixed media.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, but
Well,
yeah.
and I think that a lot of the intuitive literature that's out there kind of makes the suggestion that these things are outside of you. Like you're going to see an angel outside of you, or see your guide standing here.
Right.
And do people see that? I'm sure they do, but most intuitives, it's an internal knowing. Like, I know that you have a guide with you. I know that there's an elephant, which means X, in your field right now. That doesn't mean that I see an elephant standing next to you. I mean, I'd kind of be freaked out if I did, probably. But, I think there's kind of this switching of awareness when you're developing intuition to saying, well, in the beginning at least, it's all inside of me, and that is showing me an external reality.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still, at the moment, it's all inside of me. It's kind of different than I think how people think about it based on the literature.
Yeah. And do you ever get things where you get a little piece at one point, and then another piece another time, and another piece another time, so you don't get the whole story, as it were?
Yeah. Well, this is kind of, it's interesting because that relates to how my particular style of healing developed,
Mm-hmm.
because I work with earth energy.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, the first thing, I had a few kind of mystical experiences with earth energy, but the first time that it was clear to me that it was a direct thing was I just saw lines on the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And I got nothing else. No meaning.
Okay.
No nothing.
Yeah, no,
I just was like,
no explanation like the textbooks.
I'm like, and no, they didn't feel like anything. They were just suddenly lines all over the ground everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, that's random.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I would say about a month later, I started seeing points where the lines were not straight. They started going like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. Something changed, And then about 2 months later, it was like, oh, where the lines cross, suddenly there's now like an energetic spirit there
Mm-hmm.
who is willing to talk to me, And at first, they didn't say much to me except, I'm here. And that was it. And I was like, okay. And then, and then developed from there, within another 3 months, suddenly they were having conversations with me about what to do with the earth energy. But it wasn't an overnight kind of, all the information was suddenly there.
Okay.
And I often find with clients that I get very little information. I get to ask her about her mother. And I, insert, oh, what's going on with your mom into a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And that opens up a whole thing that then, results in a process that we then go through and it evolves. But from my perspective, I don't have any information about where that is leading. All I know is ask about her mom.
Yes, and also sometimes people assume that if you're having someone with intuitive experience, they know all this stuff, and then they're just